Hello and welcome back. I didn't expect to be doing another React video so soon or any other video so soon. And then I learned about this book, A Rhythm of Prayer by Sarah Bessey. Um, if you're even remotely up to date on modern scandals in the Christian church, you've probably heard of it and the prayer that's in it. And that prayer is what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, before I get started in my critique of this prayer, I do want to add some caveats. First of all, I really respect how the Honest Youth Pastor channel does this. He reminds his viewers not to go trolling people. And I want to reiterate that today. No matter how other people act, no matter what we think about them, no matter what we think about what they've written, we still, as Christians, have obligations to act like Christians. Which means not acting like trolls and not going out and, doxing people. So whatever you do with the information I'm going to give today, make sure you take it in a Christian manner and make sure you continue to live like a Christian no matter what you think of this. The second thing, and part of that, is yes, I do believe part of Christian living is a moral obligation to be honest with and to other people. And what I mean by that is we need to be honest with them in terms of we need to make sure that we are being as sincere and accurate as we can. If we legitimately don't know something, we shouldn't talk like, pretend that we do know something. We need to be open to acknowledging where there are things we do or do not know. We need to be open to correction. But if we do legitimately know something, if we've worked on something, we've researched it, we have reasons to believe something, we can be confident in that. But we need to recognize when we haven't done that research. We need to be honest with that. And part of this is, if we're going to critique someone, we need to be honest in the critique of them. We need to be as fair to them as possible, as fair as we would want them to be to us. So, case in point with this, I saw the tweets, not the tweets, I saw the posts about it, which were copies of the tweets. I saw the screenshot of the first page of the prayer, and immediately my defenses went up, and I was like, holy cow, this is horrible. But I treated it seriously in, okay, even though it sounds as bad as that is, maybe there's something else that's going on there. I need to look at this myself to make sure that if I say something about it, it's because I have worked through it, not because I am repeating what I saw someone else say. Or I need to say, well, this is what this other person said, and actually quote them. That's appropriate. It's acknowledging that you're just saying, something you've heard. So I went out and I bought the book. I bought the Kindle edition, which is about $15. Because I primarily do digital reading these days, and it really helps with highlights and notes and different studying things. I kind of hope it gets on Logos one of these days, but it's not on there yet, and it probably won't be on there for the rest of the year. So I bought the Kindle. It was about $15. I also, as I showed you, I made sure I bought the physical book. When the first edition of the Jesus Calling came out by Sarah Young, she had in the introduction something about really an occult practice of, she wrote the book through something called automatic writing. I'm still trying to get a copy of an actual first edition book, because they've changed every other edition since, even when keeping with the same ISBN. So I bought the physical copy of this book to make sure that if they go through and try to remove it, and then later on, oh, well, I didn't mean that, you're misremembering it. No, I have an original first edition copy that was originally printed to make sure it's unedited, and they don't change the Kindle edition, they don't go through and reprint it or something. So this is this book. It was printed in 2021. The book just came out, I think it was February. And I've confirmed that the prayer that's actually in my Kindle edition that I've been primarily studying from is the same one that's in this physical book. Because, again, if I'm going to critique it, if I'm going to talk about it, I want to make sure I'm dealing with the actual book, not someone else saying what they say about it. I had the ability to get the book, so I did. And I think as Christians, we don't always have the ability to get the books. Um, we don't always have the ability to get the original material. If we do have the ability, we should. We don't always, so I'm not taking this as a condemnation from people who, don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to go, buy absolutely everything that came out. But we should limit ourselves as much as possible to what we can confirm. So, anyways, I wanted to add those caveats to make sure, I am going to be very critical of this prayer. I'm saying that up front, but I'm trying to be, but I will try to be as honest as I can with it, as sincere as I can with it, and treat it as much as it is. And I'm going to try as much as possible to not add my own stuff into it. But there's just a lot of things that really sound not good. So let's get this ball rolling. Okay, so the first part of this, I'm going to go through a brief overview of the book. Now, I'm still trying to figure out how copyright laws work and everything, so I'm not going to have the book up on screen. I know we can use the Bible as long as it's under a certain percentage and we aren't charging for it or something. So I'm not too concerned about that. And I know Logos can be used for teaching, which is why it's on the screen. But I want to respect her book, so I'm not going to have a copy of it there. If you want to read the whole thing, I encourage you to buy the whole thing. Even though, okay, if you don't want to support her, I respect that. But if you want to read the whole thing, I encourage you to buy the whole thing to make sure we're treating her honestly. So I'm going to go through the prayer as is, but I'm not going to have it on screen. I will do some specific quotes, but I'm not going to be reading the whole thing. So this is a prayer. It's called Prayer of a Weary Black Woman by Chanequa Walker-Barnes. She is a clinical psychologist, womanist theologian, and ecumenical minister whose work focuses upon healing the legacies of racial and gender oppression. She is an associate professor of practical theology at Mercer University. And to be clear, because I didn't say it, the book is A Rhythm of Prayer by Sarah Bessey, or it's edited by Sarah Bessey. So what it is there's 15 or 16 some prayers in here. They're all individual prayers. So there's no overarching context that, okay, well, you can't understand this prayer without, reading this prayer first. But they're by a variety of people. Micah Boyette, Nadia Boltz-Weber, Sandra Maria von Opstal, Sarah Bessey herself, Laura Jean Truman, Kelly Nikondeha. I probably mispronounced that, sorry. A lot of these people I've never heard of before. A couple of them I have. So it's a collection of prayers. Now there is an introduction that gives the purpose of the book. And the general summary of the introduction is Sarah wants us to come back to a position of openness and sincerity in prayer. And I'm trying to be as concise and accurate to what she wants as possible. She wants us to come back to we can feel confident and comfortable praying whatever it is we feel like we need to be praying about, without having to worry about specific formulas or niceties in prayer. And a lot of the principle of that I can respect, because I agree prayer is supposed to be a communication. It's supposed to be a conversation, or a lot of prayer is supposed to be. There's a lot of different ways you can pray that are each of them appropriate, and they're not contradictory to each other. We should feel comfortable going to God with whatever's in our hearts and praying to Him about whatever's in our hearts. Now, in that, we need to remember who He is, and we need to remember, what He's done. We need to go in acknowledgement of Him. Like for those of us who are married, we can't go to our spouses. Like we can have the confidence to go to our spouses and be open and be sincere with them about what we're struggling with. But they're still our spouses. They're still our husbands and wives. If we feel like cussing someone out, we don't cuss them out. We shouldn't feel like cussing someone out, but I mean, we still have to remember that there are spouses. We can release steam in front of them and be open about what we're feeling, but we still have to acknowledge that it's them. We still have to acknowledge that there are right and wrong things, and we need to seek for the right and not seek for the wrong. So there is a true amount that I agree with, that we need to return to being open to prayer in a wider sense. The Psalms are a great case. And we're going to be getting into the Psalms a bit more because that's one of the defenses used for this particular prayer. But the Psalms are a great case. They show the full range of human emotion, from love to hate, probably a bit of jealousy, in many ways whining, lament, thankfulness, righteousness. We can see the themes here. I don't know how well this is going to come out on the screen. Glory, we can talk about glory, creation, evil, eternity, grief, persecution, obedience, wisdom, sacrifice, discipline, forgiveness, doubt, violence, idolatry, killing. Like, we can bring all of these things before God. Obviously, some of these things we shouldn't be doing. Like, we shouldn't be killing people, but maybe we have a case of idolatry. We should feel comfortable going to God that, we are dealing with that. Or going to God talking about idolatry in society or idolatry in our church. We can take our doubts before God. We can, go to Him about injustices that we've experienced, about persecution that we've gone through. We can ask for perseverance. We should be comfortable to do all these things. So in that sense, I agree with her. We need to get out of, rote memory and, oh, well, that's a personal thing, I can't pray about that. Or, I need to always be on my nice side when talking with God. But it's not a carte blanche, everything is authorized. So that's the situation, or that's the context that this prayer is in this book. That's the reason she wrote the book. That's her explanation for the book. So that's the context we're dealing with. Like I said, they're individual prayers. So it's not like you have to read one after the other in order to understand what this one is. So I'm only going to be dealing with the prayer itself. Okay, now that we've gone through an overview of the book, or of what the book is, who wrote it, the introduction, now we're going to go through an overview of the prayer itself. Now, if you are familiar with it, the reason why this prayer is so controversial is because it starts with, "Dear God, please help me to hate white people." Obviously, it goes past that, but so that's legitimately how it starts. Now, like I said, because of respect for the authors, respect for the book, respect for copyright, I'm not going to go through and read it verbatim. I'll read specific quotes, but I'm not going to read it. But she starts with, "Please help me hate white people," or at least not caring about them. They're misguided, racist souls. Stop believing they can be better. Then she goes in and specifies that she's not talking about white anti-racist allies, those who are helping them, or those who are helping her, those who are, standing vigil for weeks outside jails where black women are killed. And she lists a number of other things that they're doing. She says she doesn't want to hate them. She also says she doesn't want to hate ardent racists, which she talks about people that are actually going out and shooting people, that are actually, doing, acts of, racial terrorism of some kind. She says she doesn't want to hate them. She doesn't want to, or specifically, there's no need to waste hatred on them. Then she says the people she wants to hate are the other white people, quote unquote. She says she names them as the Fox News loving, Trump supporting voters who don't see color but who make thinly veiled racist comments about those people. And then she continues to talk about, vague descriptions of what they do, being suspicious of people of color, branding anyone as a heretic if they suggest that Christianity is concerned with the poor and oppressed, She says she doesn't have many relationships with those people, so maybe she shouldn't hate them either. Um, so then she says she asks for prayer for those who are progressive Christians or who claim the progressive label. Um, and she describes them as people who know enough about racism that they shouldn't be racist, but they are, in her description, still racist. Um, she describes them as, or at least spare me from their perennial gaslighting, white mansplaining, and white woman tears. Um, then she gives a Lord, if it be your will, harden my heart. Um, and she describes, let me see them hatefully, basically. Um, she goes on for a couple sentences on that. Um, she asks to be like Jonah, hard-hearted about Nineveh. Um, she asks for freedom from calling them to be better people. I'm not being facetious here. I realize that probably sounded like that. I'm trying to be sincere to what she's actually saying. I'll get into the critiques later. I'm trying to be sincere to what she's actually saying, but some of this I realize it's sounding like I'm being. I'm not sure what the right word to use is there, but unfair. I'm not trying to add motives to her text. I'm just saying her text. I realize it's coming out like I'm adding motives to it. Um, she says she will trust in God, that He will, keep her loving. Um, she thanks Him for not giving her up to slavery or to Jim Crow or to the systems of structural oppression. Um, and then she ends it with, thus, in the spirits of Fanny and Ida and Polly and Ella and Septima and Coretta, I pray and I press on in love. Amen. So that is the summary. That is a short version of the prayer. The prayer is, I think it's 3 pages long altogether. I don't remember what page number it's on in here. That's one thing I don't like about Kindle is I don't get used to seeing page numbers. Prayer of, there we go. So it starts on page 69, 70, 71, and it ends on 72. So it's a 4-page prayer. So it's a sizable length prayer. I realize I went through it really quickly because I didn't want to read absolutely everything, like I said. But that's the prayer as is. Okay, now let's get into the defenses of this prayer. And I'll do this before I get into the critiques of the prayer. I've seen 2 different defenses for this prayer. The first one, and the one that I actually find a stronger defense, is that it is the prayer of a hurting heart. And the person who made this defense specified that you need to listen to a sister on this. I don't think Chanequa actually was praying this from a hurting heart, and I'll explain why later. But that's the general defense, is that the prayer is supposed to be from a person who has suffered all of these things, and they've watched their friends suffer all of these things, and so they're just praying out of exasperation and out of desperation. Excuse me. I can't justify this prayer under that. Now, I can justify the heart behind that intent. But I think we would see a different prayer. If this were actually from a position of, I love God, but I'm hurting, I think we would see something different. But that is one of the primary defenses I've seen for it is, you need to listen to their lived experiences. I have little respect for that position, though, and let me clarify where that comes in. One, I've never heard someone. No, I think once I've heard someone say, but usually when I hear the lived experiences line, I only hear it for one specific segment of people identified by their race. I don't hear that we need to listen to the lived experiences of everyone. So it's making a racial distinction. Maybe that's appropriate in this case. I'm not saying it is, but um, I could see someone saying, "Oh well, because of X, Y, and Z, this is why it's right that we're looking at this specific segment," but not really. There's the issue of it almost always, almost every time I've seen it, it's excluding most of the lived experiences regarding revolving around any given situation and discounting them entirely or ignoring them entirely. Now, if we were to, if someone were in law, they were in a court, and they were trying to figure out whether someone were innocent or guilty, and they said, okay, we have 10 witnesses, but we're only going to listen to these two because we need to hear their lived experiences. No, that wouldn't work. That would be bad law, like really, really bad law. We need to hear all of the lived experiences first. Now, some of the lived experiences may be irrelevant, and I can agree with that. But you need to hear the lived experience first, or you need to have a way to identify why that witness is unreliable or is otherwise irrelevant before dismissing them. The color of their skin is not reason to dismiss them. Now, the other issue I have with the lived experiences thing is it presupposes the truth of the lived experiences. Now, I want to clarify here, I'm not talking about the sincerity of the lived experiences. For the most part, I know people do lie, but for the most part, people intend to tell the truth the majority of the time, unless they have a reason, unless they get a benefit. Like, most people don't lie unless there is a meaningful benefit to lying. So for the most part, if someone says, I experienced this, I accept that they experienced that. Now, what I mean by accepting it is, I accept that they're being sincere in what they understood the situation was. And many times I agree with them and think, okay, yeah, that is what actually happened. But without hearing the lived experiences of the other people, I can't say whether they're accurate or not. I can say whether they're sincere. And like I said, most of the time, if someone says, I went through this, most of the time, I accept that they are being sincere about it and they're telling me the truth as best they understand it. But the reality is, just because they are sincere doesn't mean they actually are true. Case in point, I had a guy tell me today, try to tell me what the majority of evangelical Christian or conservative evangelical Christians do and why they do it. And no, and I flat out corrected him on, like, that's not what we're doing. And now I know more or less what we're doing. I'm not perfect. I don't know absolutely everything, but I know more or less what we're doing because I'm a data guy. I go through resources and I collect resources and I examine resources, thousands of them, as many as I can. I have a solid understanding of what's going on. Maybe it's not complete. Maybe there's some stuff I'm not seeing. That's fine. But I have the actual specific things. Like I've gone through. I haven't watched in totality, but I've reviewed some. I don't know, 4 or 5 dozen sermons this month. From mostly conservative evangelicals. None of them match what he was describing. Now, okay, maybe I'm looking at a small segment. Okay, but I'm almost 99% sure that it's probably 3 or 4 dozen more sermons than he's looked at this month from conservative Christians. And I talk with conservative Christians on a regular basis. I talk with people all over the place. I probably average talking with 2 to 3 dozen people every day with, I don't know, well, talk with different religions, different perspectives. Over the course of any given month, I probably talk with a couple hundred different people. And I don't mean like, hey, how are you talk. I mean like actually have a discussion or read the discussion they're having with other people, courtesy of social media. On top of that, I read profusely. And I'm constantly seeing posts of, this video about this video about this video about this. I have a solid understanding of what's going on, and so, anyways, my point is, before the rabbit trail, he may have had experiences that he actually went through, that justify his perspective, from what he thought was going on. But what he thought was going on is not what is actually going on. It may have been true for the 2 or 3 pastors he may have had in mind. That's possible, but you can't extrapolate 2 or 3 people into 10,000 people. It's really difficult to do that. You can extrapolate 100 people better into 1,000 people. That's a little easier to get to. You need about 1,000 people or so before you can start describing 10,000 people. So to the lived experiences, they may be truly sincere in what they think happened. That doesn't mean that their description is accurate or is wholly accurate. Most of the time, what I've seen from the people who talk about lived experiences, their descriptions aren't accurate of what actually happened. And I don't mean that in a malicious way. I'm not saying they're trying to lie or they're trying to make things up. I'm saying they make assumptions about what's going on and about the motives that other people have. And they assume that those motives are true and real and absolute. And so they assume that that's the actual reason behind what's going on, when most of the time it's not. So the lived experiences defense for this, I don't buy it. Again, I respect testimony. I respect that people have their experiences. I respect that most of the time people are honest about what they're doing, or about what they're saying. They're intending to be honest in explaining what they've gone through. I fully respect that. That doesn't justify doing that. That's not a carte blanche justification for absolutely everything. Just because you experience something, even if what you experienced was true, that doesn't give you justification to just do anything absolutely anything you want about it. You still have your obligation to act correctly, to act justly. So that's one of the major defenses I've seen for this prayer. The second major defense I've seen for this prayer is that she is using a psalm style, or a style of psalm from the Bible called an imprecatory prayer. Now, if you don't have Logos software, get Logos software. It is amazing. But this video isn't about advertising for Logos software. So, but courtesy of Logos, I have this thing called the Psalms Explorer. And so I can actually click on, where did it have imprecatory? Tags. Imprecatory prayer. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but so there's 18 psalms in the book of Psalms that are imprecatory psalms. So looking at the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, an imprecatory psalm is, in short summary, it's calling a curse on people. That's generally what that nature is. It's usually not whole psalms. It's usually portions of psalms. But that's generally what it is. And yes, there's some question on there, as you can see on the screen. There's some question on, okay, how do you square "you shall not hate your brother in your heart" with how do calling curses on people? But the defense for the prayer is she was mimicking this style of prayer. I have far less respect for this defense than for the lived experiences defense. And the reason is, she's a self-proclaimed theologian with a PhD as a professor of theology. This doesn't work. When we go through the imprecatory psalms, David calls for God's judgment on evil people. The imprecatory psalms, what they do is they say, God, here are these evil people, do something about it. Sometimes he does talk about hate, but he talks about, I hate the people that you hate. He declares that he hates them. End of story. He talks about how evil they are and the evil that they're actually doing. And the evil they're doing is true evil. This isn't a I disagree with this. The evil they're doing is they're trying to destroy Israel. Like wipe out the people or enslave the people. They're trying to kill David. They are blaspheming God. They are doing truly evil things. He is not praying imprecatory prayers against his neighbor who looked at him wrong, or against a priest who said, your theology is bad. A priest in the temple of God. That's not who he's talking about. He's talking about people who are actually trying to kill him. And he goes through, and most of the time he clarifies that you hate, that he tells God that God hates them. I don't remember that specifically in this one, but I brought up 109. It's one of the most famous psalms. But he talks about, okay, let his days be few, let another take his office, let his children be orphans. This is harsh stuff. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make light of that. But what is it? They inflicted evil against me in return for good, and hatred in return for my love. O God of my praise, do not keep silent, for wicked and deceitful mouths have opened against me. He's talking about evil people. He's describing the evil that they're doing. And again, to be clear now, again, this may be his lived experience, but no, most of the time when he's talking about his enemies, he's talking about other nations that are actually trying to destroy Israel. That's most of the time he's talking about. It's kind of really hard to misunderstand if they're, shooting bows and arrows at you, or if they're shooting arrows at you, if they're charging you with spears, if they're, using slings to throw stones at you. It's really hard to interpret that as loving, or as a misunderstanding. He's talking about real evil. And that doesn't lessen racism. Racism is still evil. But there is a measure in which we can clearly define what racism is. But it's a little harder to definitively say what this particular instance is racism. There are times where it's clear, like when someone explicitly says, profane, or why can't I think of the word? They racial slurs. There we go. If someone's using racial slurs, okay, that's pretty easy to tell they're being racist. If someone specifically talks about hating someone because of their skin color, it's pretty easy to tell they're racist. Someone looked at me wrong. It could be racism. Don't get me wrong. That could very well be true. It could be they had a bad experience with someone who was dressed the exact same way, regardless of skin color. I mean, like, case in point, the MS-13 gang. If I saw someone with an MS-13 tattoo dressed like an MS-13 gang member, it has nothing to do with their skin color. Now, the preponderance of MS-13 gang members are a particular race, but if I see someone that dresses and acts like an MS-13 gang member, I'm gonna be cautious. Might even run. I don't know. That's a reasonable thing. If you dress like that, even if you're not a member of MS-13, but you dress like an MS-13 gang member, there's nothing racist about saying, I think they might be MS-13, I'm going to be cautious. There's nothing racist about that. Now, if you see, oh, there's someone who's Latino, they must be MS-13, okay, now that's, if not outright racist, that's at least bordering on racism. At a minimum, that's bordering, if not outright racism. So there's a difference. We can clearly identify what racism is. That doesn't mean that someone looking at you funny must be because of race. So David is dealing explicitly with evil people. That's what an imprecatory psalm is. That's what he's talking about. He's dealing with people. There's no question about it. There's no question about what's going on. There are evil people. They are trying to kill him. They are trying to kill his family. They are trying to kill his nation. So that's what Chanequa says her prayer is modeled after. And I just, clued in on it about the, racism discussion. But now I'm going to get into the actual review and explain why, no, that doesn't work. And again, she's a theologian. She should know better than this. If she were just some random person who realistically hadn't really studied the Bible, I'd have a lot more charity in this. Because maybe she doesn't really understand what imprecatory psalms are. No, she's putting herself out there as someone who is an expert on these subjects. So I'm going to hold her as though she's an expert on these subjects. Okay, now let's tear this thing apart. Sorry, but that's... Okay, so as I clarified it, an imprecatory psalm is an actual enemy that is actually trying to kill you, actually trying to hurt you and do you harm. That's what they're talking about. So who does she say to hate? Well, she divides it nice and easy for us into, I believe it's a total of 4 groups, but I'll cover all of them in case my math's off. So first of all, she specifies hate, or white people. So she's talking about race. This is, if it weren't for the critical race theory redefined definition of race that requires power in order for something to be racism, this would outright be racist. If a white man said, Lord, "Dear God, please help me hate black people," it does not matter what else came after that. He would immediately be accused of racism. We know that. We know that beyond a reasonable doubt. The only reason why this isn't immediately called racist by progressive Christians is because she's not a white man. That reasonably, we know that's what's going on. And I'm not trying to be super hard, but we know that's what's going on. White men get accused of, if they look at someone wrong, they instantly get accused of, oh, it must have been racism. If they don't have exact perfect, respect for different things, it must have been racism. I mean, look at the whole cultural appropriation thing. It's not wrong for other cultures to appropriate white culture, whatever white culture means. But if a white person uses someone else's culture, oh, no. So we know, reasonably and confidently, that if a white man had said, "Dear God, please help me hate black people," end of story, we know he would be called racist. So she identifies her problem is based on race. She is dividing people by race. And since she's a professor, a published author, a respected author, a leader, she has power. So even under a CRT definition of racism, she has power, she has influence. Yes, this is racism. And I'm going to get into why the defenses don't work to explain, well, no, she's just being poetic. No, that doesn't, no. So she specifies skin color. Then she says, oh, no. I don't mean the people that agree with me. She goes on to list several reasons why, but she's talking about people who agree with her about racism. She's saying she doesn't want to hate the people that are on her side. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, we shouldn't want to hate the people that are on her side. But if your problem is white people, oh, no, unless they agree with me. Oh, okay, that doesn't work. Again, David's prayers, David's psalms. It wasn't about, well, they did something a little different. It was about they're trying to kill me. So she says she doesn't want to hate the people that work with her, that agree with her. So that's, she starts with all white people, and then she the first actual group that she does. So I'll go back to one, is white anti-racist allies. That's how she identifies them. Then she says she doesn't want to hate the ardent racists either. So the people that are actually shooting people of color because of their skin color, the people that are actually racist, doing evil, she doesn't want to hate them. Well, that's who David would have prayed against. Is the people actually killing people. That's who he would have prayed against. That's who, if he said, I hate them, that's who he would have included. No, she says she doesn't want to hate them. So, this is not an imprecatory psalm. Sorry, but no. However much she may have tried to, no. She's excusing the very people that, if this were an imprecatory psalm, she should actually be targeted. So that's the first two groups. Now, no, she says the people she wants to hate, quote, The Fox News loving, Trump supporting voters who don't see color but who make thinly veiled racist comments about those people. So again, she's assuming their motives and then taking that assumption and making it fact. But two, far more importantly, she's just saying she hates Republicans. Most Republicans. End of story. If you aren't in political agreement with her, she wants to hate you. Can you imagine a greater us versus them tribalism? I'm not being facetious here. She is literally saying Fox News loving, Trump supporting voters. She is basing this on politics, on not agreeing with her politics. End of story. She's no longer basing it on their skin color, actually. She's just assuming Fox News loving, Trump supporting voters are all white people. Even though they're not. There's a very sizable people of color community that loves Fox News and watches Trump. Actually, I want to say it's a majority, but I haven't looked at this, or a majority of people of color in the country, but I haven't seen the statistics recently. I know I'm not talking about like, 0.5% of the community. I want to say anywhere from 20 to 60% or so of the community. It's a sizable population, so it's not just white people that are, Fox News loving, Trump supporting voters, but she's lumping them all together anyways, because, hey, why not paint with a broad brush when you can? So she's basing this entirely based on they disagree with her politically. And that's it. So she specifies based on politics. Now the next thing, this is the only real place where she identifies Christians. It's the only one where she actually says the name Christian. The people who welcome black people in their churches and small groups but brand us as heretics if we suggest that Christianity is concerned with the poor and the oppressed. Sorry, but I'm calling that a lie. Outright. Now, I'm not saying that she's never, ever encountered a Christian who's like that. I want to be clear. I think I have memory of one from a couple of years ago who actually legitimately believed that poor people are poor just because they're poor, or just because they made themselves poor, and we should do nothing about it. I'm 99% sure I've met one person like that. All the rest of the Christians I've met in the last decades or so, in the last several decades, all the books I've read, all the articles I've read, all the videos I've looked at, everything else I've looked at, they agree that Christianity is concerned with the poor and the oppressed. And most of them do something about it. Now, if a Christian believes that Christianity is concerned with the poor and the oppressed and don't do anything about it, that's a valid concern. But that's different from accusing people of branding someone of heretic for suggesting that. I have legitimately never, even with the one guy that I think I remember, I think I encountered him on one day 2 or 3 years ago, I think. Outside of him, I legitimately do not remember anyone having encountered anyone and from any part of the world who sincerely believes that Christianity is not concerned with the poor and the oppressed. I'm sure people like that exist just because of the reality that there's always at least that one person. The reality is there's always at least that one person. So I'm sure there are people like that who exist. And I think it's possible she may have met one or two of them. Maybe even an entire church like that. But that's not the majority of them. That's not enough to make an entire prayer about it. I've met people who are legitimately 100% against Calvinism. If you are a Calvinist, you are a complete idiot. I've met a lot of them, actually. They're not a lot in the church, though. I know they're not a lot in the church. Usually, they stay within their own groups, because usually if a Calvinist ever shows up, they immediately leave that group. So they don't have a sizable place in the church. They're not. Most, even those who disagree with Calvinism entirely, most count Calvinists as their brothers in Christ. Most are not ardently, if you're a Calvinist, you're demonic. So if I'm going to talk about the church and talk about people, either I'm going to specify at the outset I'm talking about a very specific limited group of people, or I wouldn't talk about them. Realistically, if I'm going to talk about the church, if I'm going to talk about people, I would pick such a small minority of people. I really wouldn't. If I'm going to talk about the church, about Christians, about all of these people, I'm not going to talk about Westboro Baptist. Because Westboro Baptist does not represent most people in any way, shape, or form. It represents a very small minority, even among, if I remember correctly, Westboro is Independent Fundamentalist Baptist. Even among IFB churches, Westboro is a minority. So when she's talking about the people who do this, she's talking about a sizable group of people. Like, we know she's talking about a significant portion of the population. She's not talking about, 2 or 3 people that she happens to have met one time 15 years ago. Most Christians agree Christianity is concerned with the poor and the oppressed. Now, given the fact that this book is a progressive Christian book, and given where she's come from so far, I'm 99% sure that what she's talking about is Christians who don't agree with how she thinks we should care for the poor and the oppressed. Can you imagine hating someone because they don't agree with how you think something should be done? Because that's what she's doing. She's asking God to help her sin because she doesn't agree with them. Is that not she's calling them a heretic? I mean, she's not using the words calling them a heretic, but she's treating them as though they are these horribly evil, wicked people, just because they don't agree with her. Now, again, I think a valid criticism against the general Christian church in America today, and somewhat in the world, is they don't live their convictions out. That's a valid critique. I agree there is a lot who think, yes, we should do something about the poor and then do nothing about the poor. I think that's a problem. But that's not what she said. That's not the point she's making. So she's legitimately between the political part of Fox News loving, Trump supporting voters and this gross mischaracterization of people. She's literally saying, I want to hate people who disagree with me. Which is the exact level of condemnation that most progressive Christians hate. I spend a lot of time with progressive Christians because I want to make sure I understand what it is they believe and what it is they actually teach. Most of them, they may not hate that, but they very strongly object to anyone who says this is absolutely what's right, and if you don't do it this way, you're wrong. But that's exactly what Chanequa's doing here right now. That's exactly what she's doing. Is if you don't agree with me politically, you deserve to be hated. And if you don't agree with how I think we should care about the poor and the oppressed, then you don't care about the poor and the oppressed. And that's a very different thing from legitimately actually not caring about the poor and the oppressed. Okay, so we have those. So we have the 3 groups of the white people who are friends with her, who she doesn't want to hate, the white people who are actually enemies and she doesn't want to hate them, the people who disagree with her and she wants to hate them. Well, then she dials back again. Well, I don't really have relationships with all that many people that do like that. So instead, let me hate the progressive Christians who aren't as progressive as I am. Her exact quote. The permission and desire to hate the white people who claim the progressive label, but who are really wolves in sheep's clothing. And then she goes through the rest of the paragraph, explaining how they know enough about these issues to not do racist things, but they still do all these racist things. She specifies perennial gaslighting, white mansplaining, and white woman tears. So the two groups she actually wants to hate, not the people who are killing people, not the people who actually hate people of other races. No, the two people she wants to hate are conservatives who don't agree with her. She wants to hate them. And progressives who aren't progressive enough. That's not an imprecatory psalm. That's a person with a heart problem. Sorry. She then goes on to ask God to harden her heart. Let me see them as hopelessly unrepentant reprobate bigots who have blasphemed the Holy Spirit and who need to be handed over to the evil one. I thought the whole point about progressive Christianity was not judging people. So then she goes on and she tries to redeem the prayer with, well, but, you've rescued me from these things and your love is greater. Sorry, but I don't buy it. I really don't. If she started with, Lord, I hate these people, please help me not to hate them. Okay. No, she's asking God to help her sin, to bless her sinning. That's what she's asking for. And then she ends with, well, I guess if you love these people, then I should try to love them too. It really sounds disingenuous. I'm sorry, but it really sounds disingenuous. Now, one of the reasons why I support that is, thus in the spirits of Fanny and Ida and Polly and Ella and Septima and Coretta, I pray and I press on in love. Amen. Now, I want to be clear. I don't know who those people are, but I am assuming they are people who are known for having been either slaves or having been notably oppressed. Maybe they are people who have been, shot down in racist hate. I am not trying to make light of them at all. But if someone else prayed in the spirits of Luther and Augustine, amen, we'd be all up in arms about this. This legitimately sounds like an occult prayer. Sounds like and please bring my ancestors with me to pray with me, like we see in Mulan, go pray to the ancestors. This sounds like, it sounds like occult practices, really. She doesn't say in the name of Jesus. She doesn't say in the name of the Holy Spirit. She doesn't reference the Trinity. She prays in the spirits of other people. How do you end a prayer like that? It's like the who was it? The bishop who ended the prayer last year with a man and a woman. Was that supposed to be a joke? Or was that just him not knowing anything about the religion he's praying in? And he coupled that with he prayed in the name of, what did he say? In the name of Yahweh and Krishna, and I'd have to look up the whole quote, but he referenced like 3 or 4 different religions that he prayed in the name of. This is like, I think I get what she's getting at here. I really hope I do. That she's just saying, well, I'm standing with these people who have been persecuted. But it's not, and this is, it goes back to, she is a self-proclaimed theologian. So she has no excuse for not knowing how this would sound. She has no excuse. She knows what that's going to sound like. She knows how people are going to receive it. Okay, last part of my critique, and I'm going to try to make this short because I know this video has been long. And it gets back to the totality of the whole thing. Because I've critiqued the individual pieces of the prayer. So if this were a blog post, if this were a Facebook post, if this were an email, I would have a lot more sympathy for it. A lot less criticism. Because I know blog posts and emails A lot of people do go through and they thoroughly review them before posting them, but it's usually the one person. They write it and they send it. They check it for grammar. Most people don't sit on a blog post for, or most people, and in most cases, don't sit on a blog post for 6 years before sending something out. I've seen some people say, yeah, I've been sitting on this particular blog post, for 3 months trying to figure out how to write it. But they've got other blog posts they've been sending along the way that, they write up in an afternoon. Maybe they wait until the next day to review it and publish it. But it goes through a very, very short review process. This didn't. So let me go through the review process that happened to show that, yeah, they knew full well what they were doing. They knew how it would sound, and they didn't care. So, again, Chanequa is, she has a degree, and she has a PhD. She's a professor. She's a self-proclaimed theologian. She's a ordained minister of, what does it say? She was ordained by an independent fellowship that holds incarnational theology, community engagement, social justice, and prophetic witness as its core values. I'm not even sure what to make of that, but that's where she's from. So she's an authority. Whether she's a good authority or a bad authority, irrelevant. She is an authority. She supposedly knows what she's talking about. So I'm immediately calling her out on the imprecatory psalms of no. I would argue that she's blaspheming scripture by trying to say, my model is these things that disagree with me so much. But I recognize that may be overspeaking. But so she's an authority. So she wrote this. Now this is for a book. Physical book. I realize she only wrote 4 pages of it, but book. She probably spent, for just the 4 pages, I would be surprised if she wrote it in a day and sent it. I think more likely she spent a month or 2 on it. Honestly. I'm in the middle of writing a commentary series. I'm not published yet. I'm working on that. I have an understanding of what it takes to write and what it takes to get published and what it takes to go through that process. Even for some of the articles that I write them in mind of I may end up getting published, or I may end up getting these things published as part of the work. So I spent a lot of time on it. This wasn't, almost 99% sure, this wasn't an afternoon thing of she had just been spit on and seen her friend kicked because specifically because of racism. This wasn't a I just saw this racist thing and so I'm ranting about it. No, she took time on this, and given the fact that it's a book of prayer, I'm betting she prayed about it for a long time. The book was published February of 2001. Real quick. So Sarah Bessey was the editor, which means not only did Chanequa write it, Sarah read it. Sarah went through it. Sarah verified it and approved it. So we've got 2 different people that saw this prayer and approved it in its current state. I don't know what it first draft may have been, but they saw it and they published it in its current state. Then there's the people who actually edited it. I'm no offense against her. I know very little about her. No offense against her, but she probably wasn't the person who actually did grammar checks on the book. She probably also did grammar checks, but they probably had someone who actually was a grammar editor go through the book. From looking at the book, it says edited by Sarah Bessey, but in the context of she's the author, what that means is it's an anthology of a lot of different authors, and she went through and edited the writings to the book itself, like as a whole. That doesn't mean she was the one who actually edited line by line, checked grammar, checked citations, checked whatever else. That's usually someone else. That's usually uncredited. And if I'm guessing, based on, I don't know who Convergent Books is, but I'm assuming they're a decent publishing house, I'm betting they had someone else who went through this. So I'm 99% sure there's 3 people. There's at least 2 people, but probably 3 people who went through this before it got published. And then there's the publishing team itself. The actual managing editor. The publishing editor. The actual person in Convergent Books. They went through it, and they probably had a team of 5 or 6 people that went through the book, in different ways, in different styles. I mean, they would have had a typesetter, whether Sarah hired them or the publishing house covered it, something, So before it actually made it to print, we're dealing with Chanequa, Sarah, and at least probably 2 to 3 editors. At least one of 2 were whom in the publishing house, and the editors did various things. But so there were a handful of people who looked at this before publishing it. So this wasn't one person making a blog post and, oops, I didn't realize how that sounded. I've made those posts before. So I have a lot of grace for they didn't realize how that would sound. At least up to an extent. At a certain point, it's like, no, you've been told 800 times how that would sound. For a book, there's little excuse for that, because unless they're living in an echo chamber, then they've had a lot of people review this. They've had a lot of people read, Lord, or Dear God, help me hate white people, and, oh yeah, go for it. They've had a lot of people give green light to that thing. Now, the other thing, the foreword in here was written in February of 2020, so 1 year ago from when it was actually published. At that time, she was able to describe the general contents of the book. So let me give you a timeline on that, on an estimate. Obviously, I'm not in her calendar, but what that means is there was probably 6 months at which no changes were made. So probably summer, June, July or so of 2020, no changes were made at that point. It was going through the editing, it was going through the printing, and that was it. Before that, there was at least 4 to 5 months or so after she wrote the introduction, when it was still in various review stages. At the time she had the introduction, there had probably been 6 to 8 months of writing time before then. So I'm actually reasonably confident that the authors started probably sometime in 2018. That was when the idea was out, and they were starting to gather steam. They were starting to gather names. They started the writing idea. During 2019, they went through, they started writing their prayers, or they collected prayers they'd already written. They started polishing them. They started working on them. And then towards the end of 2019 and into 2020 is more when, I'm confident this is where it was, more when Sarah had, okay, here's all the contributors, or at least the majority of the contributors, here's the majority of the content, and then they polished it and finalized it sometime probably before summer of 2020. So we're looking at a year's worth of time with multiple people reading these prayers thinking, yes, that's fine. No, I don't buy it. I don't buy thinking, I don't buy the idea that none of them realized how racist this sounded. None of them realized how controversial this was. And the biggest thing is, she could have rewritten it 1,000 different ways. She could have written it to be a decent imprecatory psalm. She could have. But she didn't. She could have written it to truly be a prayer of lament. But she didn't. She could have written it to say, God, I do hate them. Help me not to hate them. But she didn't. All of this review time, all of this publishing time, and the final product is, Dear God, please help me to hate white people. Not help me to hate racists who are killing people. Not help me to hate supremacists who are seeking to enslave others. Not help me to hate people who are putting guns to the heads of my children. No. Help me to hate white people. A prayer against racism starts by admitting that she is racist. I've heard the defenses. I respect that people are trying to make explanations for why it is as bad as it sounds. I don't buy them. Like I said, they had plenty of opportunities to say something else. They had plenty of opportunities to make other prayers, to make other arguments, to write it different ways, to make it sound less racist. They knew how controversial it was going to be. They knew what it sounded like. They knew that if a white man had made the same prayer, they would have been up in arms about this. As I said in my previous video, if you want to talk with me about this, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. As I said, I'm better on Facebook than I am at checking comments here on YouTube. So please check me out. Please message me. If Chanequa Walker-Barnes or Sarah Bessey wants to do a video chat with me, I'd be happy to talk with them about this. I'm more than happy to be corrected. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that my way is the highway. But I am saying what I sincerely believe is right. Just like I think she's saying what she sincerely believes is right. I completely disagree with what she thinks is right. So I'm open to discussions. I'm open to engagement on this. I'm not trying to be dogmatic on this is the only right way to do things. But right is right and wrong is wrong. I do believe I'm right. And if I'm wrong, I want to know that I'm wrong. And I want to understand why I'm wrong, and I want to research that. So, thank you for your time. And may those who love the Lord love his word.